disaster. Mark, there is no way. It shows, for one, the government can't sell it.
Today, Kevin Rudd warns Julia Gillard, divorce the Greens. The author of an explosive book says immigration is abolishing Germany. If global warming is so dangerous, why does Tim Flannery live by the water? And the government's latest global warming plan. Hug our pets or eat them?
Oh, you kidded me.
I'm Andrew Bolt, and this is the Bolt Report. Kevin Rudd is always happy to help Prime Minister Julia Gillard, who stole his job a year ago. So this week, he gave her useful advice. Don't get too close to the Greens, appeal to the centre. Rudd saying what many Labor MPs now fear. The government's gone too green. See, Gillard made a terrible mistake after the last election. To persuade the Greens to make her Prime Minister, she offered a formal deal and turned the signing ceremony into a public wedding. And she gave the Greens the carbon dioxide tax she promised we wouldn't get.
There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead.
Dumb. She should have realised the Greens would never hand government to the Liberals. She didn't need to offer anything. But now the Greens have got Labor so under their thumb that they've put up billboards like this in Melbourne, boasting how they got Gillard to promise $10 billion for their pet schemes. This just makes Labor look weak and the Greens strong. But the Greens are now so arrogant and extreme that Labor must fight back for its pride and for the country. Take Greens leader Bob Brown's mad plan this month for a one-world government.
Why shouldn't we now join vigorous moves in Europe and at the United Nations for a global people's assembly based on one person, one vote, one value? Parliament could be right here in Australia.
And this week, Deputy Greens leader Christine Milne even threatened to punish newspapers which attacked the government or her global warming beliefs.
The Murdoch press has been running a very strong campaign against action on climate change. The bias is extreme. It's time we had a good inquiry, and certainly bias is going to be one of the things that certainly will be looked at.
Extraordinary. And now Greens Senator Lee Rhiannon, once a leading member of the Socialist Party, has crowed how she'd got the New South Wales Greens to back boycotts and sanctions of Jewish shops with ties to Israel.
So I am very proud that the Greens adopted our position on the boycott, divestments and sanctions.
You remember the boycott of Jewish shops in Germany 70 years ago? Here's what the Greens-backed boycott of a Jewish shop now, today, looks like in Perth.
This is a company that profits from the misery of the Palestinian people and the human rights abuses that are perpetrated by Israel.
And here's what this Greens-backed boycotting of Jewish Israeli shops looks like in Melbourne, Sydney and Adelaide. Kevin Rudd has, to his credit, stood up against this. He made a point of drinking coffee at a Jewish chocolate shop in Melbourne that's being picketed. And this week he challenged another Greens campaign, its fight against genetically modified food, after Greenpeace vandals destroyed a CSIRO crop of GM wheat for which they were praised by a Greens MP. Rudd this week visited famine-struck Somalia and pointed out that the food being handed out had been genetically modified, and this technology could help feed the world. He's right. But Rudd is also sending a signal to Julia Gillard. Take on the Greens like a real Labor leader. A leader like, well, Kevin Rudd. The Greens once seemed soft and harmless, tree cuddlers. But now they've got unprecedented power, and it's time to ask what they really have in mind for us. Joining me is Andrew McIntyre, who's the editor of a new book, The Greens, which has leading experts checking all the Greens policies from defence to population. Andrew, sum up. What does living the green dream really mean for us?
Well, we did get 22 experts writing very short chapters as a definitive reference to these Greens policies, and we did it because there was effectively a void in the last year, 2 years leading up to this now green coalition with the Labor, and what we did is look at the unintended consequences of these policies. We were interested because I believe that the Greens mean well. They've got a huge support in the middle classes that want just to do something, even if doing something is worse than doing nothing, as you would agree. So we looked at their very specific policies and we said, well, if these policies came about in Australia, what would the consequences of them be? And it's pretty alarming. Well, we found that obviously they love to tax and spend. They have a mania for control. They believe in central planning, even though for 100 years during the 20th century that was a complete failure, but they love central planning, and they believe that government knows best.
Well, I want to give you one of the things that worries me most about and it's an intended consequence. This is what scares me. Say, closing down coal-fired power stations. And replacing them with what?
Now, I agree with you, but I think that is the unintended consequence. What it shows is that the Greens have a completely naive understanding of how the economy works and how wealth creation works. I just don't think they get it. I've talked to people and they just say, oh, well, we'll find something. They really do believe that green energy, even though Alan Moran in this book talks about the catastrophic, I mean, the huge cost of green energy, people don't get it. People don't think economically.
But I just wonder, Andrew, I mean, to what extent is this unintended or intended consequences? Like, to some extent, it seems to me the Greens represent a sort of juvenile daddy will pay mentality. Like, they don't look at the consequences. It's an immaturity. On the other hand, there are people that seem desperately to believe that we should be living poorer lives like this imagined past where we don't actually turn on the electricity for stuff, that it's a virtue to take cold baths and things like that.
I know people like that in North Fitzroy. They have this idea, it's the Clive Hamilton idea of affluenza.
Sick of being rich.
Sick of being rich, but these are the people with 2 cars, a holiday house, and they go to Bali at a drop of a hat for holidays. But they still, in their minds, they have this idealistic, as you say, immature idea. I like Lord Lawson's definition. He looked up green in the dictionary, and it means immature.
Inexperienced,
immature, exactly. And I think
the Greens peaked?
I think they've peaked. I do think when you look at the New South Wales election, you look at the Victorian election, and now I'm a little bit more optimistic than you. I think when people understand the latest issues with Israel boycotts, with the idea of world government, Ted Lapkin has a wonderful chapter on the United Nations in the book to assess it. When people realise just how mad they are, and I think this is being revealed now in their coalition with Julia Gillard, with his marriage with Julia Gillard, I think they'll overstep the mark. We saw what happened with live cattle trade, a complete and utter disaster. People are seeing this. People are seeing this with their eyes, and I think people say, uh-oh, enough's enough.
We shall see, Andrew. Thank you for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
Coming up, how much economic strife are we really in? Former Finance Minister Nick Minchin and Dr. Richard Dennis debate.